The crowd remembers the sound before anything else. A sharp bell, a sudden rush, and then silence. In less than a minute, it was over. A body on the canvas, a champion declared, and a face that became fear itself. You think you know this man. You think you know him as violence given a human shape, as rage in gloves, as the most dangerous boxer who ever lived. The headlines told you he was a monster. The highlight reels taught you to expect destruction. The world reduced him to knockouts, controversy, and chaos. But that was never the full story, because behind the glare of the lights, behind the myth carefully built by fame and fear, there was a very different reality forming, quiet, fragile, and invisible. A reality the cameras never stayed long enough to see. Before the roar, there was a child who learned early that the world does not protect the weak. Before the belts, there was a boy who felt small, scared, and hunted. And before the legend, there was a human being who discovered that fear could be turned into power if it was sharpened carefully enough. The illusion began early. To the public, he looked fearless, but fear was always there, burning, whispering, driving every movement. Fear of being humiliated, fear of being powerless again, fear of disappearing. What the world mistook for confidence was often survival instinct dressed as dominance. He wasn't born dangerous, he was trained to be. Every punch that shocked audiences was rehearsed in isolation. Every glare that froze opponents was learned. The persona was crafted, layer by layer, until even he struggled to see where the performance ended and the person began. And the world loved it. Because the world doesn't reward balance. It rewards extremes. The angrier he looked, the more attention he received. The scarier he became, the louder the applause grew. The more he leaned into the role, the more powerful he felt. But power like that comes with a price. What no one saw was the internal split forming beneath the surface, the widening gap between who he was becoming and who he actually was, between the child who needed safety and the image that demanded violence, between silence and spectacle. Fame arrived fast, too fast. There was no time to process, no space to question, no permission to slow down. When the world crowns you as something larger than human, it quietly takes your humanity away. Expectations replace identity. Performance replaces reflection. And the most dangerous illusion of all took hold, that this role was permanent, that this version was the only way to survive, that without fear, without dominance, without destruction, there would be nothing left. He became trapped inside the image that made him famous. Every entrance had to be louder. Every fight had to be more brutal. Every moment had to prove that the myth was real. But myths don't feel pain. Humans do. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the applause and intimidation, pressure was building. Not the kind that breaks bones, but the kind that fractures identity. The kind that turns success into a cage. The cameras never asked how it felt. The crowds never wanted to know. They only wanted the monster. What happens when a human being is rewarded for becoming something they were never meant to be? What happens when fear is mistaken for strength long enough that it becomes your only language? And what happens when the illusion starts to crack right as the world believes it has reached perfection? That answer doesn't arrive in a single punch. It arrives slowly, quietly, and once it begins, there is no stopping it. Long before the world saw power, there was fear. A small boy walking through Brooklyn streets that did not forgive weakness. His voice was soft. His body was awkward. His pockets were empty. Bullies didn't see potential. They saw an easy target. And every insult, every shove, every moment of humiliation carved something deep into him. The understanding that kindness would not save him. What stayed with him most was not the pain, but the helplessness. Home offered no refuge. The walls were thin, the anger was loud, chaos was normal, survival meant adapting, And for a child like him, that meant learning how to harden quickly or disappear. He learned to steal not for thrill, but for control. To take something back from a world that took first. Then, almost by accident, violence found direction. A boxing gym, dim lights, heavy air, the smell of sweat and old leather. It was the first place where aggression wasn't punished. It was shaped. For the first time, rage had rules, fear had form, and a broken kid discovered that his anger could be transformed into something precise. But discipline came with pressure. Every day became a test. Early mornings, endless drills, correction after correction. Mistakes were not tolerated. Weakness was exposed immediately. And yet, beneath the intensity, there was something else growing. Expectation. Not the healthy kind. The message was clear. This wasn't just boxing. This was escape. This was destiny. This was the only path out. Winning was no longer about improvement. It became obligation. As his talent exploded, so did the weight on his shoulders. Adults spoke about him like a weapon being forged, not a child being guided. He wasn't encouraged to question. He was taught to obey, to repeat, to dominate, to become unstoppable. And he listened. Because obedience brought praise, power brought safety, fear brought respect. But the cost was invisible. There was no space to grow emotionally, no room to be unsure. Vulnerability was trained out of him as efficiently as footwork was trained in. The gym didn't teach balance. It taught annihilation. And the world responded exactly how it had been conditioned to, with awe. Wins came fast, too fast. Each victory raised the bar. Each knockout reinforced the idea that he was not just good, he was different, exceptional, inevitable. And inevitability is a dangerous thing to place on a young mind. There was no celebration in his success, only tension. Every fight carried the fear of exposure, of failure, of being revealed as the scared kid again. Success didn't bring relief, it brought more pressure to maintain the illusion, to stay terrifying, to stay perfect. Inside, the fear never left. It just wore a new uniform. He trained harder, spoke less, isolated more. The louder the world got, the quieter he became, because the truth was simple and terrifying. If he stopped, everything would catch up to him, and so he kept going. The rise looked unstoppable from the outside, a force accelerating toward greatness. But beneath the surface, something fragile was being stretched too far, too fast. A foundation built on fear, not stability, on intensity, not understanding. Success didn't heal the past, it buried it. And buried things don't disappear, they wait. As the spotlight grew brighter and the expectations heavier, the cracks were already forming, not in his fists, but in the parts of him that never learned how to rest, trust, or feel safe without dominance. The world was preparing to crown him, but inside, the pressure was reaching a breaking point. And when it finally gave way, it wouldn't be gentle. It didn't happen all at once. Breaks never do. From the outside, everything still looked perfect. The entrances were louder, the victories were faster. The fear in opponents' eyes was undeniable. But internally, something had shifted. The pressure that once fueled him had begun to poison him. Control was slipping. The structure that had shaped his aggression was gone, replaced by freedom he was never taught how to handle. No one was telling him when to sleep, how to train, what to avoid. Discipline had been mistaken for identity, and without it, the edges blurred. Rage no longer had direction, fear no longer had boundaries. Fame is intoxicating, but it's also isolating. Suddenly, everyone wanted access. Praise became constant, consequences became negotiable. When you're treated like an unstoppable force, accountability quietly disappears. The world stops correcting you, and you stop correcting yourself. Inside, the old fear returned. The fear of being exposed, the fear of losing control, the fear of becoming small again. Only now, It was amplified by money, attention, and expectation. Anger followed him everywhere, not the focused anger of the gym, but a restless, volatile kind. The kind that looks for release, the kind that mistakes chaos for power. Nights grew longer, judgment grew weaker, and the line between the persona and the person finally collapsed. Then came the moments the world would never forget. Public implosions, unthinkable decisions, actions that shocked even those who thought they understood him. In those moments, people stopped asking why and started demanding punishment. The monster narrative became complete. But monsters don't feel shame. Humans do. Behind closed doors, the weight of it all crashed down. The titles meant nothing. The money couldn't quiet the noise. The fear he thought he had mastered was now in control. Success had given him everything except peace. Loss arrived, not just in the ring, but in identity. Without dominance, who was he? Without fear, what value did he have? Without chaos, what was left? The fall wasn't just public, it was internal, a collapse of meaning, a realization that the armor he built to survive had become a prison. The same intensity that once protected him was now destroying him. And for the first time, there was nowhere to run, no fight to prepare for, no opponent to intimidate, no crowd to impress, only silence. In that silence, something unfamiliar emerged. Not rage, not fear, but exhaustion. Deep, bone-level exhaustion from carrying a persona that was never meant to last, from confusing survival with identity, from being celebrated for something that was slowly killing him. This was the turning point. Not redemption, not clarity, just awareness. The understanding that continuing down this path meant disappearing completely, not from the spotlight, but from himself. The realization that strength without control is not power, it's erosion. Change didn't arrive as motivation, it arrived as necessity. And necessity has a way of stripping illusions bare. What followed was not a clean comeback or a heroic arc. It was messy, slow, uncertain, a process of unlearning violence as language, of sitting with discomfort instead of exploding through it, of facing the parts of himself that were never allowed to exist. The world still saw chaos, but beneath it, something fragile and rare had begun to form, the willingness to stop running. And that choice, quiet, uncelebrated, and deeply uncomfortable, would lead him somewhere the cameras had never followed before. When the noise finally faded, what remained was unfamiliar. No cameras waiting, no crowds demanding performance, no pressure to be terrifying, just space. At first, the silence felt threatening. For someone conditioned to live in extremes, calm can feel like danger. There were no routines enforced by others, no expectations shouted from the outside. The structure that once controlled his life was gone, and without it, time moved differently, slow, unprotected, honest. This was not retreat, it was exposure. Days became simpler, waking up without urgency, long stretches without confrontation. The absence of chaos forced something unavoidable, reflection. And reflection, for someone who spent a lifetime outrunning his thoughts, was the hardest discipline of all. He began to rebuild from the inside, not with violence, not with dominance, but with stillness. Training didn't disappear, it transformed. Movement replaced punishment. Breath replaced rage. The body was no longer a weapon, it became a responsibility. Each routine was quiet, deliberate, almost meditative. Control mattered more than intensity now, so did words. He read, thought, questioned. Philosophy entered where fear once lived. Ideas about ego, impermanence, and identity slowly reshaped how he saw himself. The idea that strength could exist without destruction felt radical. That power could mean restraint felt almost unnatural. Isolation played its role, not loneliness, the chosen kind, the kind that allows you to hear yourself clearly. away from expectations, away from narratives, away from the myth. In this hidden life, there was no image to protect, no illusion to maintain, only truth. Some days, the past crept in, memories didn't ask permission, regret surfaced quietly, without spectacle. But instead of exploding outward, he learned to sit with it, to observe it, to understand that acknowledging pain didn't make him weaker, it made him real. The contrast was striking. Once, every moment had to be loud. Now, meaning lived in the quiet. The chaos that once defined him had been replaced by routine, reflection, and responsibility. Not perfection, clarity, the kind that comes when you stop performing and start listening. He didn't disappear from the world. He re-entered it differently. Conversations replaced confrontations. Humor replaced intimidation. Vulnerability replaced armor. For the first time, he was not surviving. He was choosing how to live. And yet, calm brings its own questions. Without the monster, who are you? Without fear, what drives you forward? Without chaos, what gives life weight? These weren't questions meant to be answered quickly. They were meant to be lived through, slowly, honestly, without applause. This hidden life wasn't about redemption in the public sense. It was about reconciliation with the past, with the self, with the cost of becoming something you never fully chose to be. And in this quiet, deliberate existence, something rare happened. The illusion finally dissolved. What stood in its place wasn't a legend, not a villain, not a hero, just a man learning how to exist without needing to be feared. And that, more than any victory or defeat, changed everything. When the noise fades completely, what remains is not victory or defeat, but understanding. This life was never just about boxing. It was about what happens when fear is rewarded, when survival becomes performance, and when a human being is praised most loudly for the parts of himself that hurt him the most. The world watched the spectacle and mistook intensity for identity. It cheered the outcome, not the cost. Fame in this story is not a gift. It is an amplifier. It magnifies what already exists. Strength becomes domination. Confidence becomes arrogance. Pain becomes entertainment. And when no one asks you to slow down, you forget how. What makes this journey matter isn't the rise or the fall. It's the reckoning that followed. The realization that power without self-knowledge is fragile. That fear, left unexamined, eventually turns inward. That survival strategies, when carried too far, stop protecting and start destroying. There's a quiet truth hidden here. The world often celebrates transformation only when it's loud, but the most meaningful changes happen in silence, away from applause, away from judgment, away from the need to prove anything. In the hidden life, value is no longer measured by dominance, but by discipline, by restraint, by the ability to sit with discomfort instead of attacking it. Strength is redefined, not as the capacity to overwhelm others, but as the courage to face yourself without armor. This story exposes a contradiction we rarely acknowledge. We demand invincibility from our heroes, then punish them when they break. We consume their extremes, then turn away from their humanity. And when they finally choose peace, we call it disappearance. Because calm doesn't entertain us the way chaos does, but calm is where meaning lives. Here, identity is no longer borrowed from titles or fear. It's built through intention, through accountability, through the acceptance that the past cannot be erased, only integrated. That mistakes don't define you, but refusing to learn from them might. This life now moves at a different pace, not slower, clearer, guided less by impulse and more by awareness. The hunger that once drove destruction has been replaced by curiosity, by humor, by humility. These aren't traits the world associates with power, but they endure far longer than intimidation ever could. And that is the quiet lesson beneath everything. We are not what we are applauded for. We are what remains when the applause stops. This journey shows us that identity is not fixed, it's negotiated daily. That redemption is not a moment, but a practice. And that the hardest transformation is not becoming something extraordinary, but allowing yourself to become human again. The world may always remember the legend, but the meaning lives elsewhere. It lives in the understanding that strength without awareness is empty, that fear can be transformed, but only if it is faced, and that the most profound victories leave no highlight reel behind, only a life lived with intention. In the end, this is not the story of a monster tamed or a hero redeemed. It is the story of a person who learned, too late and just in time, that becoming whole matters more than being feared. And perhaps that is the rarest triumph of all. And everyone please like and subscribe.